Hi, I'm Carol Murfin from Back to You Physical Therapy, and you're watching DSC TV.
Partnership committee, and when the first task that the revised housing partnership committee was assigned was to work on a housing production plan. And when we started looking at the work needed to be done for that, we have a lot of challenges now. We, through the years, done a lot of looking into how to come about these problems, but sometimes it is nice to have another set of eyes outside set of eyes, and they're looking at who would we like to work with. And in that process, we selected Jennifer Bolton as a planner. She worked with a lot of different towns, Brookline, Vineyard, and what we really like is she's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. She's also a great listener and really been wonderfully interested about our town and things that make sure we're unique. And the housing management plan that we writing together will be one that has meat to it and is something we can really use as a valuable roadmap. Tonight, there was an agenda passed out. The open house kind of brainstorm session that will be left up for you to go back to with that there will be a presentation, and we'll get pretty close to that agenda. And we really like that agenda to be very efficient.
Hi, I'm Jen Bolton. Thank you so much, Anime. I really appreciate the introduction. Can people in the way back hear me? Okay, great. So we have a lot of people tonight, and thank you for coming out. So we're going to do our best to squeeze folks into the discussions. I know that there's a bunch of folks in the back, so don't worry, you'll get to participate too. But what we're going to do now is go through a bunch of information. First thing I want to tell you is why we've gathered you here tonight. And really, we want to help everybody learn about this project. And then we want to ask you to help us identify housing strategies that you think could be incorporated into the plan. And those are really the two reasons we're here. So the way we structured this presentation and this night, we're going to do some digital polling. Can I borrow one of your clickers? So the first thing we're going to do on the next slide is ask everybody to take one of these little remote controls that's on your table, and we're going to just ask you some questions. Now, what I'd like to do, since we have more people than we anticipated, is if you are on the planning board or on the housing partnership, I want you to give yours to someone else who doesn't have one. So there are probably people in the back who don't have one. And so this is not statistically significant, so you don't need to worry too much if you don't have one. If you would like to raise your hand, I'm happy to do that. How many? I have one here. Does anybody here need one who doesn't have one? Okay, so could anybody who's not on the planning board and not on the housing partnership raise your hand if you do not have a clicker? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 8. So what I'm going to do, unless anybody objects, when we're doing the clicking and we're looking at the answers, what I want to do is ask the folks that don't have a clicker to just raise their hand and answer the question, so we can see if you fall into the majority or not. Does that sound fair? Okay, perfect. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some terms that I'm going to use through the night and that you may want to use at your table. I'm going to define what a housing production plan even is, and I'm going to tell you all sorts of things, just definitions should know about housing before you start your discussions. And then we're going to look at this project schedule, where we are in this project and where we're going. And then we're going to look at different strategies that we've derived from the work that's already been done on the general plan. And we're going to go through every strategy in my presentation so that you have a good understanding of it. And then we're going to ask you to sit in your small groups, and we'll figure out how to deal with the folks in the back when the time comes, and have a discussion about those strategies. And then we're also going to give you a map of potential development sites in town, and we're going to ask you what you think of those sites. So those are the two parts of the small discussion. And then at the end of the night, we'll wrap up and we'll ask each table to tell us a little bit about what they talked about. So, hold on a second. I tested out the hold on, folks. I tested out one of the clickers right before I started, and I forgot to do that. So let me just do that now. Hold on. I'm just canceling out of that, and I'm not saving that fake session that I did, and I'm about to open up a new session. It just quit because it didn't like what I did. And now I'm going to start it again. This thing is a little bit finicky. It's a polling software, and PowerPoint is open before you start the polling software. It isn't set. So I'm just resetting it now. And now I'm going to reopen Sherborne. Let me just make sure that works. This is what I get for trying it out before. Okay. So what we're going to do, it's not working, but the rest of the questions will. It's just this first one. So what I'm going to do is just do a show of hands for the first one, and then we'll get to use the fun clickers in the second question. So just raise your hand. Are you a Sherborne resident? Okay. Is anybody not a Sherborne resident? Did anybody used to be a Sherborne resident, but not anymore? All right. Former member of a town board or committee. Press C if you're a town employee. And press D if I didn't catch it. You're none of those things. Now, one thing you should know about this little clicker is if you make a mistake, you can just press another button. If you decide if you really want to press other, that's fine. Just press it again. It's going to delete your first answer. Is everybody getting it? All right.
What if you are a current member and a former member?
Just do current.
Just do current. You can't get any current numbers and forms because you are quicker away.
I hate to say it, I use this software all the time, but the fact that I did this little test before and didn't reset it, it's totally messed up. So we're just going to do everybody by hand, and you know what? That's going to be more fair anyway, because we have like 2/3 of the room, 1/3 of the room who doesn't even have a clicker. So how about this one? Raise your hand if you're a current town, we're going to go back to the question. Raise your hand if you're a current town committee member. So I would say that's about 60% of the room. I think it's more than half. Raise your hand if you're not a current member anymore, but you were in the past. All right, so we've got, maybe, I don't know, 15%. And then raise your hand if you're a town employee. Thank you for being here. And then anything else that I missed? Anybody who's not ever on a board committee and not a town employee? Very good. All right, the next one. And this is just a self-assessment. Now, because it's not anonymous, I'd like you to be honest, but I understand everybody's looking at you now when you raise your hand. So, how familiar would you say you are with affordable housing issues and concepts? If you think that you are very familiar, raise your hand. If you think you are somewhat familiar. Okay, so most of the people in the room look like they're somewhat familiar. How about somewhat unfamiliar? And how about very unfamiliar? Okay. So what I'd like you to do through the night, as we're doing these group exercises, we obviously have a spectrum of understanding in the room. And it's really good that we have a mixture at each table of folks who said that they're very familiar and unfamiliar and somewhat familiar. So I want you to try to help each other out, but also if you need me to come over and help out, you can call me down anytime you want. Now, this one is probably the hardest question, because you're probably going to say, well, I'm here for many reasons, I can't possibly pick one reason. But it's very helpful for me and for the planners of this event to try to understand where people are coming from when they walk in the room. Why did you come to this meeting? It's really the question here.
Question, can we vote twice on this if there are multiple reasons?
I would like for you to vote once, and I know that it's hard, but it doesn't tell me a lot if everybody raises their hand for everything. I suspect most of you are here for multiple reasons, so try to pick one. If you simply can't pick one, then you're allowed to say other. Fair enough? Okay. So I'm going to read the categories first, and then I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Did you come here to advocate for affordable housing, to protect community integrity, protect open space and natural resources, to advocate for that, ensure economic vitality of the community, which housing is intricately related to, gather information, or some other reason? So those are the choices. So raise your hand, and this is going to take some bravery. Usually I do this anonymously. So the brave ones, raise your hand if you're here to advocate for affordable housing. Thank you. So we have a mixture. We have some tables who have not chosen that at all. B, if you're here to protect community character.
How would you define that?
How would you define it is the question. Yeah. Anyway, you define that. Okay. So we have a scattering of that. How about protecting open space and natural resources? All right. I think every table has someone answer that way. Ensure economic vitality. Okay. Interesting. Thank you. Gather information. And something else, and that can mean you simply can't choose. Okay, a few of you. Thank you for doing that. All right. So I'm going to give some basics here, and some of you are very familiar with this subject already. We're going to go through it fairly briefly, but if you want a lot more detail, we do have a handout that Jamie has at the front table, and also I'm happy to be pulled aside and talk to you more about it through the night. But here's some of the basics. What is Chapter 40B? In a most simple way, it's a state statute in Massachusetts that sets an affordable housing goal for the state. Can folks hear me if I stand way in the corner like this? Okay. The goal is that the state wants to see that every community has 10% of its total housing as affordable. And then the question is, well, what happens if we don't have 10% of our housing as affordable? So I'm going to talk about that. But that's the basics. That's the most basic explanation you can give of Chapter 48. What happens if you don't have 10% in your community, which you don't? It means that developers can propose projects through something called a comprehensive permit. How many have heard that term? Okay. And you have a number of them in the community. So, and what that means is the developer is allowed to request waivers to override zoning primarily and to streamline the process so that they really just go to the zoning boards. Another interesting thing you should know, not that relevant here yet, but after a community gets past the 10% goal, you can still do comprehensive permits. You can still allow comprehensive permits. And the reason some communities do that is because they like some developments that their zoning doesn't allow. So I just want you to know that comprehensive permits can happen in any community, regardless of whether you're at 10% or not. But when you're not at 10%, the community has less control to deny or put certain conditions on those projects. I want to introduce you to another term. Can people raise their hand if they've heard of the subsidized housing inventory? Okay, so some of you. So really, it's really simple. It's just a list. And it's a list of all the homes in your community that count towards that 10% goal. And you can get it online. And there are 4 things that make a home count on the subsidized housing inventory. And sometimes you hear people say the SHI. It just means this list of the units, of the homes that count. There are 4 things that a unit needs to meet. 1, it needs to either be subsidized or it needs to be created through a local initiative. And I'm going to talk to you a bit about what that means. It means, in your case, a town-initiated project. It could also mean that your zoning bylaw, for example, encourages housing that counts on this list. Doesn't need a comprehensive permit because your zoning bylaw encourages that kind of housing. So that's the first thing. It either needs to be subsidized or created through a local initiative. Second thing, it needs to be affordable to households with low or moderate income, and I am going to explain exactly what that means on the next slide. They need to be affirmatively, not just fairly marketed, but affirmatively marketed. So what that really means is that the community can't say, we want all of the affordable units only to go to people who have a connection with this town. You can say you want up to 70% of the units in a project. And then the last thing is that it needs to be restricted. So just because something might be cheaper than something else, maybe there's an accessory apartment, or maybe there's some very modest home in the community that would be affordable to a lower moderate income household. That doesn't put it on the subsidized housing inventory. It actually has to be restricted so that when the household that's living there now moves, the home still stays affordable for the next household who moves in. So those are very basic definitions. And this is your SHI. This is Sherburne's Subsidized Housing Inventory. You probably can't read it way in back. What it says is that you have 2 projects. It's Leland Farms, and they're both local initiative projects, by the way. One is Leland Farms, and the other one is Woodhaven. And those are the 2 projects with units, homes that count right now on the subsidized housing inventory. Leland Farms is 10 units, and Woodhaven is 24. So I told you that I tell you what low and moderate income housing means. This is what it means for your town. Well, for every town. It means income, incomes at or below what's called 80% of the area median income. And I'm going to tell you what that means. The area is not just your town. It's the metropolitan area. And for Sherborne, you're part of something called the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy area. And this map in yellow shows you how large that area is. It includes all of Boston, all of Cambridge, all of Lowell, and it goes up into New Hampshire. It's a very large area. And they look at the median income of households in that big area. And that's how they figure out what household income thresholds are for a subsidized housing unit. In your area, in this large yellow area, these are the income thresholds. And it varies based on household size. So, how many folks in this room live in a household by themselves? So, households that are one person, your income can be $51,150 a year or less to be counted as a lower moderate income household. How many people here live in a household with 4 people? A few of you. So if you have 4 people in your household, and your household makes an annual income of $73,050, that's the max, then that's considered lower moderate income. And now that's every earner in the household. So if you have 4 people in your household and you have 2 earners, it's the combination of both of their salaries. If you have a single parent with 3 kids, it's the single parent's income. Is this making sense to folks? Okay, I don't want to bog you down too much in definitions, but I think it's important that we're all talking about the same thing, especially when you get into your groups. So I wanted to make sure to run through those.
Is there also an asset test?
There is an asset test. Yes, that's correct. So, this is what we've been hired to do. We've been hired to create something called a housing production plan. And that's a very specific plan that is approved by the state, and it meets certain state guidelines to be approved. And I'm going to tell you what that gives the town in a minute. But first, let me tell you what the state says has to be in that plan in order for them to approve it. You need to have a needs assessment saying, well, what kind of needs are in this community and also in the region for housing. You need to have goals and strategies to show how you're going to eventually, doesn't have to be right away, but eventually achieve the state's goal of that 10%. And you need to have an action plan that shows in year 1 of this 5-year plan, this is what we're going to do as a town. And year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, this is what we're going to do. And this is who's going to do it. It could be the planning board, it could be the board of selectmen, it could be the housing partnership. But you should know, in this purple box, there are things that you can put in a plan that the state doesn't require, but that are often something that communities want to see in the plan because it helps address local needs. So we're allowed to put other things than those first 3 bullets into the plan. And so some examples. You might want to see some creation of middle income units that wouldn't meet those thresholds. They'd be higher than those income thresholds, but something that you still see a need for in your community. Wouldn't help you get to your 10%, but it might help address a need for middle income housing. You can also provide what the term of art is direct assistance to households. Have people heard of rental vouchers, like Section 8 is an example of that? Or a home buyer program, like helping someone with down payment assistance to help buy a home. Those are the types of direct assistance programs that you can also put into your housing plan. Some of them might create units that count on the SHI. I can use that term now, right? Everybody knows that means subsidized housing inventory. And some of them wouldn't. But you can still put a strategy like that in your plan. And then you can also just have strategies that we want to see more diverse housing options rather than all single families. Maybe we want to see some other options. They might not be affordable, but we still think they're important to give people more choice in our community. And that was goal number 2, actually. So you can have things like that in the plan. Won't help you get to 10% necessarily, but it's still allowed to be in the plan. So I want to make sure you knew that, because some of the strategies that we are asking you to weigh in on, some of them would help you get to the 10%, and some of them wouldn't really help you get to 10%, but they may be things that you'd like to do anyway. Any questions on those basics?
What percentage of the monthly rent or mortgage would be what percent of the income?
30%. Yeah. So the question was, I don't know if people can hear back. When you're determining how much a low-income household could pay for a mortgage or rent, or any housing costs really, you establish a threshold of 30% is the general rule of your gross annual income. Okay. So oh yes.
The SHI slot had those developments, but it also, I didn't catch it, had rental homes on the other side. Are rental apartments units considered? Yes. Are they considered part of that, no matter what their rent is?
Yes, exactly. So if you have a Chapter 40B comprehensive permit that is all rental, and only 25% of the units, or 20%, are affordable, and the rest are market rate units, you can count all of them towards your 10% goal. But if you have an ownership project, like a condominium project or single-family homes, you can only count on the SHI the units that actually are affordable and deed restricted. Yes?
My question comes from owning a two-family home that we rent out part of. And is that automatically on this list?
Probably not, because in order to be on the list, it needs to be created either through a subsidy or through a local initiative that created this housing for affordable housing. It also needs to have a deed restriction saying that this unit will be affordable no matter if the current owner or renter leaves. And it also needs to be affirmatively and fairly marketed, so that means that the owner of the project, or the unit yourself, would need to broadly advertise and go through, usually you go through a lottery to select a tenant. So it's very different from having a two-family in. Okay, so I said that I'd give you another reason and sort of the strength of doing a housing production plan for a community like yourself that isn't at your 10% goal yet. And that's something called certification, or safe harbor. Has anybody heard of this term before in relation to this? Okay, so maybe just a few people. So this is important for you to understand. I know that you have a number of comprehensive permits that the town is looking at right now. Sherborne, I'm going to give you some math here, okay? Sherborne has 1,479 year-round homes. And this is based on the 2010 census. That's just what the state looks at to set this number. In 2020, they're going to change the number. So just doing the math, that means that your community needs a total of 148 homes on that list, on the subsidized housing inventory. You'll remember from, if you could even see it, from the subsidized housing inventory list that I showed you a few minutes ago for your town, you have 34 units on it currently, Leland Farms and Woodhaven. So that means, just doing the math again, you need 114 more units, more homes that would count on that list. So let me walk you through these 3 steps. And this gets awfully confusing for people. So please do ask me a question if it's not making sense. There are 3 steps. 1, the planning board, Board of Selectmen, and then the state needs to approve this plan that we're working on. If they vote to approve the plan, and the state then approves it, you have what's called an approved plan. Once you have an approved plan, and your town permits at least 7 units that will count on that subsidized housing inventory, then your town can be under what's called safe harbor in an informal way, and the state calls it certification. The state will certify that you have produced the minimum number of units to certify your plan. And what that means is that the Zoning Board of Appeals can deny or impose conditions that they otherwise couldn't do for a comprehensive permit. So it gives the town much greater local control over 40B proposals. So I'm going to stop there. I know I just gave you an awful lot of information. Anybody confused? Yes.
What happens after that year?
So you get 1 year and then you have to start again. So if you're able to produce 7 units on average every year, then you can remain in safe harbor. If you can produce, it's actually 15 units. Normally you just, well, I don't want to get too complicated. It's just a rounding issue. Yeah, if you double that number, but in your case it's 15 units, then you get into safe harbor for 2 years.
So is that 10% calculation static until the next census comes out? So even though
Correct. Correct. And so what a lot of communities that are either close to or at the 10% do is they try to plan ahead, thinking, well, if this number is going to go up, then we need to start planning early to try to produce some units so that we stay at the 10%. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this concept? This is very important. This is the main reason I would say that towns that aren't at 10% want to do a housing production plan. It's to gain that local control. Mark?
Could you explain what the safe harbor numbers are without the housing production plan?
Oh, yes, it's 2%. I think it's 30-something units. Yeah, it's 2% of your year-round housing units. So each year, yeah. So you have to produce a lot more units to get into a safe harbor if you don't have a plan. That's approved. Yes.
Is the 0.5% per year the minimum increment is required?
You got it. So the question was, is that 0.5%, the 0.5% a year on average, the minimum to get into safe harbor? And the answer is yes. That's what the state says is the minimum. So in your community, it's 7 units. Here, and then here, and then here.
So it says town permits. So when the permit is issued, is the action that's not when it's built?
Good question. That's correct. It's when it counts on the subsidized housing inventory. So if you have a comprehensive permit, 40B, and the zoning board approves it one night, and then they write the decision and they file it with the town clerk, it's the day they file it with the town clerk is when it gets on the SHI and counts. Yes.
So if you're in a given year at 5.5%,
Yeah.
You said that there are certain conditions that ZBA can impose.
Yes.
So they don't have the ability to say, we're not going to even talk to you as a developer.
Well, you can't not talk to someone who's already submitted. You have to still open the hearing, but you can deny it. But you have to go through, if somebody submits, you have to give them notice that you believe you're in safe harbor, but you need to open the public hearing, and you need to officially deny the project. Or approve it, and put conditions on it.
Based on where you are in terms of the permit.
Exactly, but often, developers don't really want to bother putting in a proposal if they don't feel it's going to have support, and they don't want to go through all that work just to get it denied. So you often see that unless they're already working with the town on a locally initiated project, that they often won't even bother putting in an application if you're in safe harbor. Hold on, I said over here and then I'll come to you. I think Libby, I'm sorry, I forget.
Oh, Marion.
Marion, that's right.
Yes, if the town produces, or anyone produces more than 0.5% in a given year, I assume that it carries over to the next year and it continues to carry
It
over.
doesn't, it doesn't. So if you produce 15 units, which is 1% in your community, and it's not double 7 just because of rounding. If you produce 15 units, you get 2 years safe harbor, but if you produce 30 units, it doesn't help you in that regard. It has to be 7 or 15 in a year to get either 1 year safe harbor or 2 year safe harbor. So hold on, I'll take you in a second, but.
I just want to follow up on Rob's question. You're talking about the numbers. There's a project in town, which others know well, Whitney Farms.
Yes.
I think it's fully approved. Does that count towards the number?
Not yet, because it fall off the SHI. So my understanding is that project got stalled. And any units that did count, I don't remember the number offhand, have since fallen off the SHI, and you can't get them back on once they're off to count towards your safe harbor. You can ultimately get them back on. So it's a little complicated. You don't need to know know this nuance, but the units only count towards safe harbor the first time they go on the SHI.
I think it's a little bit, I know that's a question that's going to come up with Whitney Farm, you get a year, and if they're not constructed, then they fall off. So the same situation might be able to share where we could have counted them for that year, but just given where things were going, we didn't actually list them because how many they're not constructed, even a miracle would make them constructed by the May 7th deadline.
I think I have one over here and then I'll take you. Yes.
If you had a 3-year plan for 21 units, and you just kept producing 7 years, do you have to go back to the board? Or you're still in good graces once you do your 7 years or 3 years?
It's a good question. So it's when they first count on the SHI, so when the zoning board approves them, then they count. So the only way that would work is if you actually phased the requests so that the zoning board approved 7 at a time. So that's a little complicated way to do it, but that's how the math would work. Let me take one more question and let's keep going. Yes?
I see on that listing for Sherburne that Leland Farms will no longer be afforded.
I think that that's not correct. Yeah, it said that on the state gave us that, but I think that that's not correct. Do you want to clarify? This is Gina, the town
I don't know where that came from the state, but they also sent us a list of housing units, and I think variance that are at one point. So the special permit that approved that project specifies that they're eligible in
perpetuity. Yeah. So we'll need to tell the state that there's a problem with that, and hopefully they'll change that. They may need the documentation to change it. All right, I said one more, but I'm going to say one more, and then we'll move on. Go ahead.
Just, I want some clarity, because as I understand it, any project that's filed for a comprehensive permit prior to certification of the HVP does not count. So Coolidge, Fields, and Whitney cannot be brought into this.
Yeah. So here's the thing. It depends on when it's approved and when this plan's approved. So let's say this plan gets approved by the state on June 15th. I just threw a number, that's about when we're looking for, but threw a date out. And let's say one of the current projects gets zoning board approval on, what did I say, June 15th? On June 16th. Then that will count towards your safe harbor. But yes, it will. You can't deny it, but you can use it to certify the plan.
Not if the comprehensive permit was filed prior to the acceptance.
That's not true.
Okay,
the comprehensive permit, as long as the zoning board votes, and actually it's more than just a vote, votes and files the decision with the town clerk after, it can only be a day after, we finish and the state approves the plan, then it can count towards your safe harbor. You can't deny it because you're not certified yet. Okay? Okay, good. So that generated great discussion, and I really like to make sure that people really understand those steps because it does get awfully confusing. All right, so the next thing I want to tell you about is the project schedule. We are basically in the middle of this project. It's a pretty quick project. We started a few months ago, and we've prepared all the demographic analysis and the housing conditions analysis that the state requires, and now we're working on goals and strategies. And you know that we presented 3 goals. Those were based on work that your community's already done as part of the general plan. We just extracted that. We did a little wordsmithing and a little simplifying, but basically those are the goals you've already come up with. And we've asked you what you thought of them. And it looks, from what I can tell, that you mostly liked them. And then tonight we're also going to work on some strategies, and that's what I'm going to spend some time doing in a minute. And then this plan will go to the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen in May. I can't recall if we have an exact date, but I know that our timeline was in May. And then we'll send it to the state for approval. Now, one thing, because I know you have a lot of 40Bs and the timing is important to you. One thing you should know is that the day we submit to the state what they would consider a complete plan, even if they end up taking 4 weeks to review that plan, they're going to approve it retroactively to the day that we submitted the complete plan. So if we submit that complete plan and they agree it's complete, we've done everything we're supposed to, on June 15th, and they don't give us our letter until July 15th, it's dated retroactively to June 15th, the day that we submitted the complete plan. So that's important for your timing as well. I just want you to know that. I don't tell all the communities, but you guys have so much going on that I know that that's important to you. So this was already on the back there, so you probably already know this, but year-round homes, 1479. You need 114 to reach your 10%. But I did want to point out these other two things in the middle. As housing planners, we try to figure out what your need is. And we look at the 10% as really not being a need. It's kind of an arbitrary goal that the state set. What we want to look at is, well, how many low and moderate income households are already living in this community? And this is just an estimate. It's based on the census, so there is sampling variability. So this is not an exact number, but what the census says is that it's 250 households with lower moderate income that meet those thresholds I showed you before are in your community. Now, what this doesn't look at is their assets. So they could be billionaires but not have much income, and they'd be counted on this number. But that's the number that we have. And then we look at how many of those 250 households who are already living in Sherborne are spending too much money for housing costs. And when I say too much money, I mean something precise. I mean, how many are spending more than 30% of their income on housing? This again is an estimate, so it has sampling variability, but according to the census, 189 of those 250 households are spending too much money on housing in your town. Again, doesn't look at assets, so do we care if a billionaire is spending more than 30%? Well, no, not really. But this is the best number that we have. So I just wanted to point that out. That's one way we look at housing needs. Here and then here. Yes?
When you say too much money on housing, does that mean taxes, mortgage? What does it mean exactly?
Yeah, so if you're a homeowner, it means taxes and mortgage insurance. If you are a renter, it means your rent and your utilities. And if you own a condo, your condo fees included.
That's a clarifying question on that.
Yeah, of course. Oh, and I have another one.
The retiree, though, if someone could have paid their house off, actually doesn't have any more houses costs other than property taxes and maintenance. So someone that had a higher income but is now retired,
yes,
doesn't have as high income in their retirement, but their house is paid off, they're not paying a mortgage any longer, they're paying property taxes.
If those property taxes are more than, if any cost they're paying is more than 30%, they'll be counted in that number.
No, I understand that,
Yeah.
but how do you know what the housing cost is? You don't necessarily know what percentage of houses are paid off.
We don't based on that number. That's anything you're spending on housing. Whether or not your mortgage is paid off, it includes the taxes.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
You don't know what percent of the town has houses paid off.
We don't know from that number, but we can actually get that estimate if you're interested.
Okay.
But we can't correlate it. We can't correlate it with this number, but we can tell you how many households are estimated to have mortgages that are paid off. If you want us to find that number, we can.
It seems relevant to where you're trying to say on the slide.
Yeah, we just can't tie it to that particular number. I hear what you're saying, but I wouldn't spend too much time thinking about that number. I think if you shoot for 7 homes a year, you're going to be doing something. And, we look at that number because we look at housing needs and we look at what the state wants us to look at. But in your community, I think we should be honest. 7 units isn't going to be easy. Unless you have a lot of big 40Bs, which you do, but which I don't think you really want most of them. That's my sense from you. You can tell me if I'm crazy, but that's what I'm getting from the interviews that I've done and whatnot. So I think we should focus more on that 7-unit number. But I can provide that information if you're interested. All right. Did one other person have a question about that slide? Yes.
I'm just wondering if you could give us a very quick capsule. You said there's an asset limit.
Yep. It's usually $75,000.
Okay.
But it really depends on the program. Yeah, it's pretty low.
Yes.
So when you say 7 units, if there's new construction with 7 rental units?
Correct.
It doesn't have to be 7
That's
standing homes.
Yep.
But if it's 7 condos,
correct,
then they all have to be
affordable. You got it. You got it. Okay. So let's talk about Sugar children's approach. We think you have basically two big choices, in a way. You could achieve 10% in a very short time with all the 40B activity that you have now. Or you could try, and through this plan and certification, try to foster smaller projects over a longer period of time. Now, that's a little bit deceiving because you don't have all the control in the world over the 40Bs that are already out there. But I think that that's why so many people came to this meeting, is because they're interested in trying to have greater local control. You can tell me if that's not right, but that's my sense of why there's so many people in this room tonight. And so, if all the projects in the pipeline were permitted, we think that you'd get to about 11.3%. And you'd be, you would have met the subsidized housing inventory goal, the 10% goal. But we also know that development that's that fast for a small community raises a lot of concerns. And we heard a lot of these concerns through the interviews that we did, looking at infrastructure constraints, looking at impacts on your schools, on traffic, on water infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, and the environment in general, and there are probably more impacts that you may also be worried about. So the third bullet says, if you have a slower development pace, averaging 7 homes a year, that can help you more strategically plan for any impacts of the new development. So that's it. I mean, I think most of you probably get that already, but I wanted to be very clear that, we've learned that from you as well, that that's something you're concerned about.
Can I just point something out?
Sure.
So you were saying that if all of those 40B proposals were permitted, we'd be at approximately 11%.
Yep. Yep. You got it.
But I think everyone needs to keep in mind that's each one of those 40Bs is only 25% affordable. So the impact on the town's infrastructure, schools, population is actually 3 times higher than just...
Yeah, except for the rental ones, because those units will all count on the SHI, even if some of them are market rate units. Okay.
But I'm just...
Yeah, you're right. Okay. So this is a map that shows the yeah, go ahead.
Can you back to the last slide? Your last bullet point said that averaging 7 homes per year.
Yes.
Is that, I'm not sure that's accurate. If we do 6 one year and 8 the next year, we don't get the safe harbor for the first year.
You're right. I should have said a minimum.
So it's a minimum of 7.
A minimum of 7. You're right.
Okay.
You're right.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's make sure we get into the strategies in a minute, but this is just a map. We're going to actually pass out a map that is very similar to this, so not going to spend out a lot of time, but this shows the location of the 40Bs that are being proposed. And then the map that we're going to give you at your table shows a little bit more information than this. All right, so here's some strategy ideas. So Jamie, this is a good time to pass out the handout. So we have 11 strategies to show you. And we want to make sure that we go through each one so that when we ask you to talk about it in your groups, you'll understand them well enough to have an opinion on it. And what we're going to do is give you a handout that lists all 11 goals. And we're going to ask you or invite you, if you want, you can make notes on that as I'm talking about what you like about the goal, or if you hate it, you can cross it out. But this is just your personal notes. And then when we're ready to have you discuss, we're going to give you a big sheet so that you can record your group's comments on them. Now, where do these goals come from? They really came from the general plan. So there's already been community input into generating these goals, and what we did is we looked through the draft general plan that the town's already worked very hard on, and we distilled some of the goals. So you'll see that we have only 11, and the draft general plan has lots of them, but we grouped some together and we made categories more for ease of discussion than any suggestion that we want to lose any goals. And there are really 2 kinds of goals. It's not too important that you can distinguish between them, but just so you know, there are things that are local initiatives, things that the town can foster either through money or land or capacity, and there's regulatory goals, things that you could change primarily about your zoning regulations that you can consider. So those are the two types of strategies. I think I might have just said goals a minute ago, and I meant strategies. We'll talk about strategies. Okay, my watch is telling me that I have 10 minutes left. So we have just under 1 minute for each strategy. So, number one, now, you'll see up, does everybody have a sheet? No. Okay, so we'll get it in a second. Okay, so we're going to need to share. Can you make sure every table at least has some sheets?
This exercise assume that we have not had to deal with 40B projects in the last 3 or 4 years. In other words, it's an academic exercise in part.
Not necessarily. I think that you should consider your actual situation, what you think might be likely to happen. I don't know what's going to happen, but you may have a better idea than I do with all these 40Bs out there. And then I want you to say, which strategies do you think we should go for, knowing what's out there now? Okay, do enough people have a sheet that people can share and see? Okay. Is there anybody who can share theirs if you feel you have too many? So we printed... Okay, all right, thank you. And you can also flip over your agenda and take notes on that if you'd like, if you don't have your own paper. All right, so number one, locally initiated development. You've already done this twice. You did Leland Farms and you did Woodhaven. Those were things that the town initiated. You had land and you issued a request for proposal. I actually don't remember how Woodhaven was done, but I know for Leland Farms, the town worked very hard to find a development and design something that they thought was appropriate for that location. That was all town-driven. So that's what I mean by local initiative. But the way that local initiatives are usually done, your town was more, I guess the word, you were more involved in your local initiatives than some other towns might be. Some other towns might acquire land or use surplus land that the town already owns and figure out what kind of development you would like to see there, whether it should be rental or ownership, whether it should be cottages or small multifamily. Design some parameters, but of course making sure that those parameters are feasible. And then you would issue a request for proposals and say, hey, we, town, has this piece of land. We'd like to see this kind of development. We've done some studying of that land to make sure that this kind of development is feasible. We know the environmental characteristics of the land. We know what kind of septic system it might need to accommodate those types of units that we're talking about. And we'd like to get proposals from developers, and we'll give you the land for free, or for $1. As part of our local subsidy to make this development feasible. That's what I mean by local initiative. And so you could attract a development organization like Habitat for Humanity, for example. Maybe you want to see a couple of duplexes, and that would give you 4 units that are affordable. Or you could attract some other type of development company that does small-scale projects. Yes, it can be for profit, yeah. Some communities only want to work with nonprofits, and because you own the land, you get to choose. But sometimes there aren't enough nonprofits who want to do the kind of development you want to see done. So it's better in those cases to open it up for for-profit or nonprofit. So because you own the land, you would make a local choice around that and have a lot of control. And that's the benefit of these types of local initiatives, is that the town gets to control them a lot. Yes?
But I don't quite understand, if the 40Bs go through and we do our plan, we'll end up with double the amount of houses.
So if the 40Bs go through and you end up with a lot of units and you don't want to create any more, then don't do it. Just because you say it in the plan doesn't mean you have to do it.
2020, they're going to redo the census and we're going to have to shoot for a higher goal again.
That's a good point too. So the number will change in 2020 and you'll want to be planning for that and looking at the building permits that are issued and looking at the number of households, right? So it's all about being strategic. That is an important point though. Just because you put a strategy in this plan, there is no stick if you don't do it. You can put something in and then a year from now say, you know what? anymore, and you just don't do it, and nothing happens to you. Okay. Well, not if you're over 10%. So he's saying if all the developments happen, we don't really need to do this. That's true. Yes?
I just did it, just for you, on 2020, you're gonna be at 90% of everything that's permitted. Because you'll be at 1,767 units, 160.
So he just said 2020, you'll be short.
You'll be short.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a couple of examples of other communities that have done local initiatives. This was in Carlisle, which is a similar community to yours in some ways. It has a similar population. It's less than 5,000 people. And one difference, though, is they actually have the Community Preservation Act. So that gives them a local funding source to do some of these local initiatives. But the Housing Authority, and that's another difference. They have a housing authority. So there are some differences, but it's a comparable community in terms of size. So the Housing Authority had some extra land, and they worked with the town to find a developer. It was actually a nonprofit developer, written right up there. People call it NOAA, but the actual name of the developer is Neighborhood of Affordable Housing. And they've done lots of projects around the state. They're based in East Boston, and they mostly do small-scale type development projects. And what they did in Carlisle is a project called Benfield Farms. They tried to make part of it look like a big barn to try to fit into the character of Carlisle. And they built 26 homes that were senior apartments, and they were all affordable. So this is 26 units. There's another part of the building that's off the picture. So the 26 units aren't all in this barn-looking thing. They're also in some other buildings that are kind of off to the side. It's 26 senior rental apartments, and they're all affordable. And they used volunteer work, they used free legal advice, and they used their Community Preservation Act funds. The Community Preservation Act funds, part of it went to help with infrastructure, road, septic, and water. This site has no public water and no public sewer. So in that case, it's similar as well. Yes?
If the town used totally restricted housing, will be a problem with that? Because clearly that makes a difference from school.
So the only problem with that is that if townspeople have a policy to only focus on senior housing because they want to exclude school children from coming into the development, then depending on how that's framed in public discussions, it could create fair housing issues because families with children are a protected class. But if you have a development and you have town-owned land and you want to create senior development, a lot of towns have done that. The biggest thing that you have to be very careful about is you don't want to have an overarching town policy that says the only things we'll even think of is senior housing. So it's a little bit of a nuance. All right, the other example I'm going to give you of local development is this one. Oxbow is in Wayland, which is bigger than you, 12,000, almost 13,000 people. And actually, this site had town water, but no town sewer. So, a little bit different, but some similarities to the infrastructure constraints. The town actually bought this site from the federal government. It was a dirty site, it was a missile site. And the town used their CPA funds, again, the CPA community, to clean up the site and get it ready for residential development and recreation use. They have a bunch of uses for the property. Then they put out a request for proposals and found a developer. This one was a for-profit developer. And they built 16, this is home ownership units on the site. And this is what they look like. They're LEED certified and everything. You can see the solar panels on the top. So that's another example of a local initiative. They bought a property, cleaned it up with town money, and then sought a developer to develop something that they wanted to see. The RFP actually said a maximum of 16 units, so that's what the developer did. But in order to set that maximum, the town really had to make sure that's actually feasible. Because if you put out an RFP that's not feasible, nobody's going to respond to it. All right, now, you might ask, well, how are we going to pull something like this off? One idea is to build some capacity with a local trust. There are lots of examples of trusts in the state. Some of them are town trusts. They're called municipal affordable housing trusts, and they're created by town meeting. Others are private trusts, and it would be created privately, essentially. There's an example of a quasi-private trust in Concord that was actually created partially by the town, but it was always meant to function as a nonprofit. So that's kind of a mixture, and I put that one up on the slide. So you can have different versions of this. But the idea is that the trust would be able to buy property and sell property without further town meeting votes, and it would be able to issue requests for proposals for those properties. And it could even be able to work with entities like the Rural Land Foundation to do some type of conservation and housing project in a creative way. So that's what idea number 2 is, and it really helps to support idea number 1. Now, the biggest question with this idea is, where does the money come from? You don't have CPA, Community Preservation Act. That's how most of these trusts are funded. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just something you need to think about. All right, number 3 and 7 I actually grouped together because they're both about town center. The reason they're so far apart on the lists is because the top part of the list are what I consider local initiatives. The bottom part of the list are regulatory. So number 3 is a local initiative, number 7 is regulatory, but they both have to do with your town center. So what I learned from looking at the documentation that the town provided with me is that this town's been talking about your town center for a long time. There's apparently a 1958 master plan that talks about the town center. And a lot of the, what's that? Did I get it wrong? Okay. So, and a lot of the concepts that you're still talking about now are in that old plan. So you've been talking about your town center for a long time. And we also looked at the survey that was done as part of the general plan in 2014. I don't know, how many of you took that survey? Do you remember? A lot of you did, okay. So your voices are in here, and a lot of people were not very satisfied. The red is, not really that satisfied with different aspects of our town center. So, and then up above is just showing you the zoning of your town center generally. And so these are the ideas. Number 3 is encourage new homes and mixed-use buildings by creating more infrastructure, public water and or public sewer infrastructure to your town center. I know you've been talking about this. Wanted to throw it in there and like you to talk about it at your table. Number 7, which is related, change the zoning in your town center to help encourage new homes and mixed-use buildings that help you with how you envision what you want for that town center. And I know that you had done some work a few years ago thinking about, well, what do we envision for our town center? You went through a whole visual preference survey to figure out what kinds of things do you like in other communities. And then Metropolitan Area Planning Council put together these visions showing you what they think you like. And this is just one of them. Above is what I think it looks like now, at least it looked like then. And then below is an idea for, I don't even know what that little street is, probably somebody in the audience knows, but the bottom is this vision for, well, what could a mixed-use development look like in our town center? We want it to look appropriate to our town center, not Natick. And so this is kind of the feeling, something that's, this is 2.5 stories, it has some small shops on the first floor, so that was the vision. So let's move on. Number 4. So this is very rare in the state, but Amherst actually did this, I think about maybe less than 2 years ago. They lobbied the state legislature to let them give a property tax incentive for developers who create affordable housing and meet certain criteria that they thought was important. They would give incremental basically tax credits. So if you improved a property and your taxes went up by 25%, you don't get taxed on that 25% right away if you build affordable housing of the kind that they want to see. And they have it all laid out in the special legislation. Now, this is not easy, but it's been done before. And I know that this was an idea that was thrown out or thrown into the general plan draft. So I wanted to put it into your discussion tonight. It would take special legislation, and you could really craft what kind of incentive do you want to give? What would the criteria be? You know, is there a certain location in town you want to give this incentive? Is there a certain kind of scale of development? So it's just one idea. All right, numbers 5 and 11 I grouped together because they both deal with what some people call conservation subdivisions, other people call them open space residential design, and I'm going to call them something else just to throw you off. I'm going to call you natural resource protection areas or zoning. And that's just a newer term for the same thing. Some people call them cluster developments. So there's two strategies that relate to this. Number 5 is a local initiative strategy. Try to work with the Sherburne Land Foundation, and Martha's Vineyard does this quite a lot with their land bank. Their land bank goes out and finds beautiful open space to protect, but they say, well, this piece of it could maybe be for some affordable homes. So we're going to work with a local nonprofit or a local housing trust to try to come up with a design that both preserves the open space and creates some homes in a portion of it. They don't necessarily need to be affordable homes, but you can integrate affordables into this type of design. Now, hand in hand with that is strengthening. You already allow a cluster, but there's something called the Natural Resource Protection Zone that really flips cluster zoning or open space residential zoning on its head. A conventional subdivision is typically the one that's by right, as long as it meets all the subdivision requirements and you design the road in a certain way and you meet the density. And the cluster subdivision is usually the type of subdivision that a town requires a special permit, so an additional layer of review. Well, this flips it. It says, well, we actually like the cluster better on the bottom because it preserves more open space. And we don't really like the classic conventional subdivision that much, so why not make the conventional subdivision harder to get by having that be the special permit? And making the natural resources protection design, the cluster design, easier to get because that's actually the one we want to encourage people. So I'm happy to talk more about it, but that's the basic idea here. So one idea is local initiative, work with the foundation. The other idea is zoning to help implement that idea from a regulatory point of view. And these don't have to be affordable or they could be affordable. It's really up to you. But it would help you with smaller lot sizes, maybe even smaller houses. Some communities do sort of cottage style houses in these types of developments, so it could help you with housing diversity. So these are some examples. Actually, these are not examples of cluster, they're examples of inclusionary zoning. But Concord River Walkway, those small houses in Concord on the right, is kind of an example of cottage-style homes that could be built in that kind of natural resource zoning area. Inclusionary zoning just says that we want to adopt a bylaw that says if you build more than X number of homes, you could do it for single family or you could just do it for multifamily, you could really craft it in any way you want. Then we want to see that a certain percentage of those homes are affordable and count towards our 10%. And you can craft the percentage yourself. There's a lot of local control in this kind of bylaw. And these two projects are examples of what you can do under inclusionary zoning. The one on the bottom is a mixture, it's in Amherst. It's a mixture of reusing an existing farmhouse and putting a few units in it, and then creating some other buildings that look like they could be outbuildings on the farm, but they actually have multifamily housing in them. And because there's an inclusionary zoning bylaw, the developer had to build a certain number of affordable units in this type of development. And you could have design guidelines in this kind of a bylaw saying, we only want to see this type of development if it looks a certain way. Some people in the interviews I did say, we're kind of interested in this concept of a farmplex, something that might look like a farm, but it really has a few units in it. And so that's why I put that picture up. And then the other one is in Concord showing cottage style. Could you just give examples with the incentives for that? Yeah, so usually the incentives are you get to build more units than you would if you don't do the affordable. And the town would determine how many units that is. Yes.
Jennifer, if developments that include low, moderate, or low-income housing are done with these strategies, does the homeowner or the town need to go through the state housing office and the SHI process?
No, so if you do this type of zoning, it's counted under local initiative. I know that's confusing because I said local initiatives are things that you do and this is regulatory. But that's how the state says, instead of a subsidy or a Chapter 40B development, if you allow affordable housing or encourage it through your bylaw, your zoning bylaw, then you can count those units on the subsidized housing inventory under a different program. And you don't need to remember the name of this, but it's called the Local Action Unit Program. And you can submit an application based on that for any inclusionary units. And they don't need a 40B permit. Yes.
But they still have to meet SHI requirements?
You can make them meet. You can say that in your bylaw. Or you don't have to say that in your bylaw. It's your choice. Yeah.
Well, if they don't meet SHI requirements, will they still count it as the SHI?
No. But some towns have inclusionary zoning that creates middle income units because they see a need for that, but they don't really care if it counts on the SHI. Yeah, so it's local choice. All right, idea number 8 is, you know, your EA district, Elderly Affordable District. You have 2 projects under that right now, Abbey Road, or the Abbey, I'm sorry, what's it called? The Abbey, yeah. And the other one is Sherburne Meadows. Do you know where that one is? Up by the Framingham line, I think. So those were created, so town meeting approved what's called an EA district, Elderly Affordable, so it's senior housing basically. Yeah. And so an idea is, well, what if you expanded that type of zone to also encourage affordable housing that's not necessarily for the elderly, but allow both elderly and multi-generational, or just affordable housing. So the consideration is, and I was thinking through this, these are both ideas in the general plan, but I think with inclusionary zoning, the prior slide, and this slide, you'd want to somehow combine them, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to have the EA district looking for affordable and the inclusionary zone. You'd want to somehow design them so they're working together. And so I would actually take the one before and this one a little bit together and just talk about, do you want zoning that allows and encourages affordable housing within developments? That's sort of the basic question. Whether you do it through your EA district or through inclusionary zoning or like a mixture of both. Is this making sense to people? Okay, just call me over if you get to that part and you know what I'm talking about. All right. Board of Health regulations came up a lot in my interviews. And the idea here is, why not just take a look at them and see if anything can be changed. So they're more strict than the state regulations. And one thing, idea is to allow shared or cluster systems, which would enable things like that Concord Riverwalk photo, remember that little cottage style one? You could cluster houses and have a shared septic system on some of the open space that helps support the septic needs of all of those houses, rather than every lot having a septic system and a well, septic system and a well, septic system and well. That makes the natural resource protection zoning unfeasible because the lot sizes would be too big and you end up getting that conventional subdivision instead of the natural resources. So this is kind of interrelated to that conservation idea as well. And so we're not saying change it, we're saying why don't you look at it and see if they can be updated. There are a lot of communities that do allow this kind of shared system. All right, last one, strategy idea number 10. Your accessory bylaw is very restrictive. So to encourage, if you want, to encourage more housing options in single-family homes that doesn't really change the appearance of the single-family home, you could consider these things. One is to allow rent to actually be paid for the apartment and not just for a family member or a domestic servant. Now you do allow low or moderate income rental apartment if it's for a low or moderate income household, but I bet, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, I bet you've never seen a proposal like that because it's totally infeasible. Who would want that kind of unit? It's too hard. How do you do it? Okay, so the idea here is why not just make the accessory bylaw a little bit easier to create an accessory unit. There's probably a lot of them illegal anyway, So why not make them legal? Why not say you can get rent? Why not say it doesn't have to be to a family member or a domestic servant, employee, whatever? How about letting it be a little bit bigger than 800 square feet? But maybe you say, we'll let you do it by right if it's less than 800 square feet. But if it's bigger, we want to see it. So why don't we make that a special permit? So you can tier it. You can say, we're going to make it easier for a certain type of accessory apartment. And then if you want to do something else, let us know and we'll look at it by a special permit. Yes?
Just a quick note, I was talking to someone that was trying to do a rental, a small rental in Edgartown, and if it's a private well, it can't be a rental. It has to be a public water system, or each rental has to have its own well. It's being processed right now.
In Edgartown?
It's an Edgartown non-profit that they're trying to do 12 rentals on, and they don't have public water, so they either need to do a public water supply on site, or they have to do 12 wells because you can't rent unless you control your own water system.
Okay, that's interesting. I hadn't heard about
Which
that.
really hurts the small rental project in town because you have to basically...
So if you could incorporate that in the discussion notes, we'll look into that a little bit and see if that will affect changing this bylaw. Okay, so those are the strategies. And again, I know that we're running a little behind schedule, so if some of them are confusing when you get to them, just pull me aside and I'll help talk you through it. So now I'm going to tell you what we're going to do in this exercise. So I want you to have a discussion with each other. And what we're going to do is we're going to have the people in the back, not yet, but when we're ready, we're going to have you just join a table, any table. Grab a chair, bring your chair. And I know that the groups are going to be big, but that's because there's a lot of people in this town who care about this subject. So I think it'll all be fine. Your groups will get a little bigger, and just choose whatever table you want. But let me tell you before you move what you're going to be doing at your table. So your groups are going to be big, so this will be more important than ever. We want to make sure that there's not one or two people that dominate the entire discussion and nobody else gets a chance to speak. So, in order to mitigate that concern, what I'd like you to do is do something that you probably did in, I don't know, kindergarten or elementary school. I want you actually to go round robin, at least in the beginning, till everybody gets a chance to say what they think about things. And then you can do more of a free-for-all. If there gets to be a real problem with managing the discussion, pull me over and I can see if I can help. So these are my rules. Listen to others, respect to points of view. I know you're not all going to agree with each other, but I'd like you to be better listeners than you are talking. You're here together. We could have asked you these questions in your living room by yourself. But we don't think that that's as valuable as having you actually talk to the people at your table and listening to each other's ideas. 2, we are going to be timing you, and so I'm going to be ringing the bell when we're almost done with this first part of the exercise, and then I'll ring it again when it's time to move on. 3, everyone speaks once before everyone speaks twice. That's, anyone speaks twice, that's the round robin thing. And then 4, and I hope this is a relief to you, I know it is for me, you don't have to agree. It's fine if you have divergent opinions. I just want to make sure they're recorded on your sheet so that we know that you discussed this and people didn't agree, and Jamie's about to hand out the sheets. I can't hand out things ahead of time because then people stop paying attention to me. So they're going to come out in just a minute. And this is what the objective of the assignment is this. Work together with your group to discuss possible housing strategies, that's part A, and then work together, we're going to give you a map in part 2, and discuss possible development sites. And the way we're going to use these results is we're going to integrate your thoughts into the housing plan and figure out which strategies and which development sites we should include in this plan. So when you are done with the first part, and you might be done much faster than I ring the bell, and that's fine. If you're done, raise your hand and we'll give you the next part. If you're not done and I ring the bell, then you actually have to stop and do the next part. So those are the 2 options. And the other thing you should know is that you have about 30 minutes for each section, but you may not need that time. You may run down those 11 strategies very quickly and say, hate it, hate it, hate it, okay, maybe. And that's fine. So what I want you to make sure to do is not get stuck on any one thing, can always move on and maybe either come back to that one or just say we can't decide and move on. Does anybody have questions about the general structure of what we're asking you to do? Okay, so Jamie's going to hand out 3 sheets for every table, and the 3 sheets will have all 11 strategies on them, and we would like one person to be the scribe, and please pick a person with good handwriting, because we will be reading every single word that you write on these sheets and transcribing them. So as soon as you get a sheet, you can go ahead and Alright folks, that's it. I know that some of you aren't done, but what we're going to need to do now is move on to the next one. If you finish the next one early, you're welcome to go back to the first one, or stay a little bit after school if you need to finish the first one. So now what we're going to do is we're going to maybe hand out a map that we created for this discussion. And you'll see, can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me?
You want a hand?
Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. So, you will see on this map, who has the map? Raise your hand. Who has the map? Raise your hand. Okay, good. You will see on this map a bunch of sites. Some of them are the 40B projects that are out there, and some of them are some ideas that we've heard about. And who has the questionnaire, the big sheet that was passed out? Steve, could you read that? Listen to Steve. This is what you're doing.
Alright, so number 1, we're going to indicate areas of agreement, unresolved issues, and differing perspectives, and describe any concerns.
Can you read the top part?
Discussion exercise part 2, development sites and areas. So identify 1 or more sites that merit further consideration for creation of affordable or mixed income homes in the next 5 years. So again, number 1, we want to indicate areas of agreement, unresolved issues, and differing perspectives. And number 2, for the sites that merit further consideration, what type of development or housing type might be appropriate for the site. For example, cottages, small multifamily, duplexes, farmplex, mixed use, cluster, site plan and design, etc. And big blank space for you to draw apartment.
Okay, so here's the thing I want you to pay attention to. We're asking you which sites, listen to these words, merit further consideration. We're not asking you to say absolutely this site. We just want to know what we should further consider. That's all we're asking. And then if you have a vision for those sites of what kind of development might be appropriate, to write that down. Any questions on the assignment? Okay, great. So you have a little bit less than 30 minutes now. All right, folks, I know that you can keep talking, but we are out of time. So I am hoping that you talked enough that you at least have some things that you can share with me. If you would like to stay after a little bit, you're welcome to. We're just going to be breaking down a little bit. But what we'd like to hear now is a little snippet from every table. Now, you're not going to be able to tell us everything. We're going to look at your notes, and please try to make your notes as thorough as you can. This report out is really just little snippets from every table, and I'm going to ask other tables if they agree with the things that were talked about at that table. So you'll all get a chance to see if there's large agreement about certain things. And the first thing I want to ask, I'm not going to tell you who I'm asking yet, I'm going to ask one of you. The first thing I want to ask is, what did you think of the strategies? Now, I don't want you to tell me what you thought of every single one. What I want you to do is say, were there 1 or 2, or you might say no to this answer, but the question is, were there 1 or 2 that you all agreed is something to consider pursuing? So just tell me, is there 1 or 2 that you all, or mostly, how about that, agreed is worth pursuing? Who would like to go first? Okay, go ahead. John, you may need to stand up and introduce yourself.
I'm Tom Gibbons, chairman of the planning board, and miserable real estate.
And can people hear him way back?
So we, for strategy, this is in exercise number 1.
Yes, exercise number 1.
So for strategy, the majority of preferred number one, local initiatives, initiated development, it gave us control and preferred to make them more rental.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Can you raise your hand if your table also generally liked number one? That one didn't. Everybody else seems to like it pretty much. Okay. I would like to hear from this table who didn't raise their hand. What did you like at your table? Can you name one thing?
A lot of like the idea of the flood cluster.
Yep. What? The flip cluster, so I forget what number it is, but the natural resource protection zoning? I think it's number 11, right? 11. Yeah. Did anybody else, any other tables generally like that one? A little mixed, but a few. Okay, all right, good. Okay, perfect. So the table over here, I can't see your letters anymore, but Steve's table. Is there something other than those two things that were mentioned that your table also liked?
To be honest, we only got through about 3 or 4 things because we were talking a lot about each individual one.
Sure.
But I'd say that the only thing that we really had a lot of agreement on was number 1, the local initiative projects.
So the same as these folks?
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. How about the table in the back? Was there any one thing that has not been discussed yet that your table supported in part 1 of the exercise?
Identifying the properties might be at risk for 40B and trying to get ahead.
Ah, okay, being proactive. Okay, so you added that one on.
The accessory apartment.
Accessory apartment? Okay.
Yeah, so I would say 1, 5, 11, 10. Those were our favorite.
Okay, perfect. So let me just ask about accessory apartment. Did any other tables like that idea to make it more flexible? Well, raise your hand if you think you like it. It's mixed, but it seems like maybe 50%. All right, good. Who did I not call on? Did I call on you guys? Is there anything that was discussed, that hasn't been mentioned yet, that your table liked in part 1?
There's a lot of factors favorable to number 3.
Remind me what number 3 is.
Is encourage new homes and mixed-use buildings in the town center, but everyone agreed that the cost of water and sewer is very daunting.
So the considerations of cost, but they like the general idea the cost would be. Did any other table generally like the concept of bringing water into the town center? You know, you might have had reservations about the cost, but you kind of like that idea. These are your tables. Okay, how about individually? Let's see individual. All right, I think that's like maybe close to half. I'm not sure, maybe 40%. All right, let's ask about sewer. How about sewer detection? All right, I think it's a little the same. I'm not sure it's the same people, but I think it's about the same amount. Okay, good. How about the rezoning of town center? Did anybody like that idea or discuss it? You didn't discuss it? Okay, so even if you didn't discuss it, do you like it, like as an individual, to think about rezoning town center? It kind of goes along with the infrastructure? Some of you. Okay, all right, good. All right, I think I called on, did I call on you guys?
Not officially, no.
Is there anything else that you'd add about part 1 that you hope people can hear? How's that question?
Yes, we talked about the idea of the mixed use and rezoning, and like the idea of being able to have residential mixed with businesses.
In town centers.
In town centers.
Yeah.
The accessory dwellings were, we thought that was a good idea. It was not sure how that would help. It was even complicated to get those on our SHI.
Yeah, it wouldn't get on the SHI. It would just help diversity. Okay, good. And I think you're the only table I didn't officially call on. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah, go ahead and say your piece on part 1.
Oh, okay, well, we pretty much reflected everything else that's been said by the other groups. public-private conservation development initiatives and cluster development of various kinds. And there was mixed opinion on water and sewer in town center. Okay, majority were for.
Okay, good, good. Let's move on to the development sites. Raise your hand if your table was able to generally agree on at least one site. You guys? All right. So about, I don't know, 5 tables it looks like. Okay, so let's hear. Which sites did you generally agree should merit further consideration?
Well, we drew 4 or 5 circles, and with no disrespect or reflection on the current owners. And certain apple orchards. Town Forest on the corner of Lake Street and Route 16. A parcel of land over near Framingham on, what is that, Prospect Street? Oh, I mean, oh, Sunshine Dairy, and then this is... Yeah, and then, well, forget Framingham, but the Pulte land.
Okay.
As a possibility.
So raise your hand.
That's a good shot.
Okay, good job here. Raise your hand if your table talked about and then generally liked the idea of certain apple orchards. Okay, no. How about the town forest? You guys talked about that? Okay. How about the Sunshine Dairy? You guys did. And somebody back there raised their hand? Okay. And how about the Pulte land? Does people know where that is? You guys talked about it? You guys talked about it? And you guys did. Okay. So, could you raise your hand if a property that you discussed and generally favored was not on that list?
Yeah.
Okay, what one?
The property that's right next to Town Hall.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, so what do people call that? I forget. Costing. Okay. Did everybody know where that is, generally? Did anybody else talk about and generally like that parcel?
That's one day where?
You guys did? You got it. Okay. How about something else that wasn't mentioned? Just call out. Anything else? Who? What did you talk about?
We talked about the town center, and we preferred multiple small-sized developments with cluster, so that we preserve open space, but multiple small-sized developments. We're concerned about large development in the town center.
So,
we also
yeah, we all agree that we'd love to approach Whitney Farms and see if we can talk about repurposing.
Repurposing Whitney Farms, looking at various parcels in town center for small, multifamily, and mixed use, right? And then generally doing clusters on, you know, more farmland type or open space type parcels outside of town center. Is that fair? Did anybody else talk about any of those things? Any of those things? Yes.
Agreed completely with this table about the cluster zoning and smaller projects.
Yeah.
One area we identified was, we think Rural Land Foundation owns 3 lots adjacent to the old Humphrey Blueberry Farm on Western Avenue.
Okay. That could be potential. Okay, thank you. And now, what did you guys want to say?
Framingham line, Western
We talked about, as far as so it's like gradually or figure out a way to make that.
The existing affordable elderly housing, or it's not affordable, no it isn't, it's not affordable. The existing elderly housing, to try to convert that over time into SHI eligible units. Oh, what's the name of that?
No, it's different, but
Sherman Meadows. Okay, that's an interesting idea. Anybody else want to share an idea? They talked about that no one talked
some kind of land swap somewhere else in town.
A land swap to develop the whole playing field. Anybody else talk about the playing field as a possibility that you favored? Talked about it, didn't favor it. Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to say something? Go ahead. A brownfield site by Odessa, I'm not sure where that is. Do people know what she's talking about? Yes? Did anybody else talk about that? Brownfield site near Odessa? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's the same area? Okay. All right, so please make sure, okay, let me just ask, does anybody have a burning desire to say something else before we close?
I do.
Yes.
If there's a desire to get 7 additional units a year, rather than try to do this exercise every year, maybe you'd want to consider find a large parcel that you could continuously build on rather than...
Okay, that's an interesting idea. So what about strategizing, finding a large parcel that you could phase over time and build 7 units on average, you know, something like that, so that you can maintain safe harbor. All right, so please make sure that your notes are good, because that's how we're going to record what you said. And that's everything we needed to do tonight, but we're going to be around if you want to participate more in that goals exercise and the visioning. Feel free to do that now. And I hope you can come out to the Board of Selectmen and Planning Board meetings in May. Thank you.